Hello Internet, I'm Zon, and welcome back to another drawing commentary video. As of right now, it is nearly the end of December in 2019, and just like I've done in the past, what I'd like to do is go through designs that have been posted in the last year, take a sample of those, and talk a little bit about what was posted and do sort of like a reflection / retrospective on work done in the last year. And what I've done for this particular recording session last year, and I think the year before, what I did was one massive recording where I went through everything that was posted up on the DeviantArt site, and it ended up being a pretty long set of videos. What I'm doing this year is I'm going to do two separate recording sessions. This first one is going to be just a sampling of the pixel sprite designs that I've posted throughout the year. And I'll go through all those and I'll talk about them. And then the next recording session is going to be a sampling of all the regular two-dimensional designs that I posted in the last year, and I'll go through those. By breaking it up, I think it'll be two slightly smaller sessions. I took a sample of about 20-something designs for each. The hope is that going through all these won't end up being an hour and a half long video. So what we can do is get started here, and I have these in chronological order. I'll say what date they were posted and the name, and then I'll talk a little bit about each piece, and we'll kind of move through as quickly as possible. First up of the designs posted, this one was posted on January 2nd of 2019, and this particular sprite set is called the Lynx family. And this particular design was another exercise and something I've done a little bit so far as I've been drawing these pixel creatures, and sort of inspired by things like Pokemon, where you have creatures that have more than one evolutionary phase, in quotes. I took a specific theme and started with a first stage, second stage, and a third stage, as shown by the little monster arrows here on the screen. And the Lynx family are these sort of feline-ish creatures that are aligned with the ice element. And I don't have their names handy at the moment since I pulled all these into one master folder, but the first form is here, a smaller, sort of diminutive creature with these tendril-like tails and 4 eyes, and then its second form is a bit more feline looking. It's sitting on its haunches here, the body's a little bit longer, but it still has the same tendril-like tails and 4 eyes. And then the final form is this more quadrupedal, hunched over cat-like creature, which has a much more pronounced fur pattern, and instead of having the tentacle tails, has these twin long furred tails and maintains the 4 eyes. When I do these particular multi-stage pieces, I pick a couple specific traits that I want on each of the additional forms. In this case, it was sort of the long tails and then the 4 eyes and then the blue color patterns. And then for each successive form, I incorporate those themes and either build on them or change them slightly, and the final one sort of reflects a combination of all three. So what we see here is the 4 red eyes, that's a constant. The first form has a lighter color scheme, the second one has a darker color scheme, and the third one has a mix of both. And it's always an interesting exercise when I do these, since I do them usually at the same time. I'll draw one, then the next one, and the next one. The whole idea of incorporating traits and fusing them together to create something that looks like it has a through line is always a challenge, and I've done several of these. There might be one more that I picked for the sample. We'll have to see. It would have been later. Moving on, this one was posted in January 16th of 2019. And this one is called Unimpressed Moodfish Paratha. And this one has a bit of an interesting story behind it, because when I was drawing it, I remember this is on one of the streams. The whole thing started with a basic circle shape. One exercise I try and do every once in a while is use simple shapes for the start of these designs and then build out things sort of as the ideas come to me. And for Paratha, it took on a more fish-like design, taking kind of a page from things like maybe Magic Heart from Pokemon, but it incorporates these spiky quills, sort of like a puffer fish. And as I was drawing the fins and everything else, adding the details, the expression is what ended up being distinct for this one. The expression on the fish here is very akin to the look of disappointment or disapproval, which I can put on screen for a second. I've used that expression on my avatar because it's one of my favorites. But as I drew this one, it took on this expression of sort of a grumpy looking fish, and it was pretty memorable compared to some of the other sprites that I've done. And what I ended up doing is taking this one, and I've done it for a few of the sprites. I'm working on some more, but this ended up becoming one of the first shirt designs that I put on our Redbubble store. And it's just the graphic of the mood fish with the text underneath that just says unimpressed. And I ended up printing that one out into a hoodie to test out, and the shading could have been a little bit more distinct because the screening, especially the pinks, came out a little bit lighter than I would have wanted. But overall, the screen quality for the sprite type designs was pretty decent from Redbubble, and I'm decently happy with how that turned out. So this one, despite it not really having any direct influences or being from something by reference, it ended up being one of the more memorable designs, which is why I put it in the sample here. Next up, this design is from January 30th of 2019. What I tried to do in the sampling is not just pick every single design that was posted in a month. I post these once a week on Wednesdays, which means you're going to get about 4 per month if the timing works out. But what I did was I tried to be a little bit selective and pick and choose here and there, so it's not going to be every single posted design in 2019, otherwise this video would be 2 hours long. But this one is Vulcan Flair Razgon. And this particular design may or may not have been influenced by the fact that I'm still playing a lot of Jurassic World Alive on mobile. Talked about it before, I believe, but that is a very similar game to Pokemon Go, just using Jurassic World dinosaurs and hybrids. And I think some of the themes float over into this one because you have a very sort of Stegosaurus or Dimetrodon-like creature aligned with the fire element. It has a pattern of these magenta stripes along its body, and these ridges along its back are actually magma or solidified lava, volcanic spikes. And overall, the idea of a quadrupedal creature, reptilian creature that has a fiery scheme was something that was in my mind at the time, and I think some of the more dinosaur type aspects probably float over, which is how we got this one. The shading is a little bit interesting in that I think I messed around with color sliders a little bit, because normally the shading goes lighter to darker, but this one the shading is a bit reversed. The tan body has these lighter, sort of orange looking highlights, which I think lends itself better to the volcanic theme. And looks like I missed a spot on the shading, I'll have to fix that. But that's this one. Next up, we move into the month of February. This one was posted on February 13th of 2019, and this one is called Deceiving Frost Tree Omlu. And in addition to the more creature-like designs, or sometimes it's their kind of Cthulhu-esque monsters or dragons, I try and experiment with plant designs too. And I think last retrospective I pulled a handful of designs that would have been kind of along that line, but this one was inspired by dryad or ent-like creatures, and Amlu is aligned with the ice element. The ice element, just to recap, is the icons you see usually in the corner or underneath the designs that show their element. And I'll make it a point to sort of point that out in all of these, just to sort of tie in the whole point of this. But this particular creature is an ice tree. And unlike some of the other ones, I did this one in layers. I created its body with the roots and the little twig arms and its branches. But the frozen fruit, in quotes, that are hanging from its branches were done on a different layer in Photoshop when I was drawing these. I wanted to make it look like they were on top of the design, not just part of it, and it ended up being easier doing them all on a different layer, and the end result is that they look like they're overlapping instead of just being part of the same layer. And I think it turned out pretty decently. This one has an interesting expression, and one thing I think I put on the DA post when I uploaded this one is it sort of looks like it was dancing, and if I got better at animation, I wouldn't mind doing a version that shows this thing sort of dancing from side to side. I think that'd be a pretty funny animated GIF to use. And on topic, I don't know if I'm going to go through it as part of this video, but probably at some point before the end of the year, I'm going to be posting a compilation GIF for the Modular Core Mecha series, which we will talk about later. I was messing around with GIF creators online and was able to compile all the ones I created this last year into an animated GIF that cycles through all the mecha models rapidly. And I think that'd be kind of a neat thing to show, so I'll probably put that up on Twitter towards the end of the year, as sort of a recap. But we can go ahead and move on here. Next up, we're skipping into March. This one was posted on March 6th, 2019, and this one is called Ground Insect Tsumegan. And this particular creature is an insect type aligned with the stone element. And it sort of got elements from an earwig-like creature you could see with the long body and the pincer-like tail. Interesting story on this particular design. I believe I talked about it on the previous retrospective a little bit when it came to my background with the Rhinoceros software, which I use to do the two-dimensional designs. I don't use that for these, but I have a whole library of monsters that I created using Rhino in 3D. This would be very primitive CGI that I was tinkering around with when I was first learning the software. And this particular design, like one of the older ones, the mid-on that I posted before, this one comes from that monster library. It was a creature that I designed way back as part of a different series that I was writing some lore for that never really panned out into anything. But when I was going back into the archives of work I've done and trying to figure out what I'd like to translate into sprite form, this one ended up popping up, and I took the model and converted its traits over to just a two-dimensional sprite and filled around the color patterning, gave it these stripes. But this one actually comes from an established monster concept, and I can't remember if we'll see that again with anything I've pulled in the sample for this year, but I'd like to do that some more as I work on these and just pull things out of the archives. And I teased it a little bit before, but I think what I'll try and do in 2020 at some point is do a drawing commentary video where I go through a sampling of my old 3D work and talk a bit about the monster designs, just so you guys can see what I keep talking about when I reference that in these videos. But that might be an interesting project for later. Moving on, this one is from May 1st of 2019, and this one is called Howling Turbulence Rillon. And this particular design is part of a 4 design series of elemental creatures. The 4 main elements, fire, water, wind, and stone, are all a variation on this particular type of creature. The very first one was a type of dragon, I want to say. Might have been the fire element one, which I can't remember if I posted already. But what I did was I took the main design, drew it, and then for each successive element I took the base design and then edited parts of it, redrew things like the face or limbs, or added different specific traits that reflect the element. And for Rowland here, it's a wind element monster, so I gave it some bird-like features. It's got feather-like tail and a bird-like beak, and I added the burst of air that it's spitting here. It's a little bit hard to see the shading because of the the stroke filter on it that puts a white background on the actual whole thing. But I tried to create something that looked like gusts of wind using whites and grays as a shade. And I believe this one and the fire one were posted. I just don't remember the order, but I'll plan on posting the rest probably in 2020 sometime. Each design is distinct enough that I think I can post it without it just being something like a palette swap, which I haven't really done yet. But overall, it's an interesting exercise. Moving on, we are still in the month of May. This one was posted May 8th of 2019, and this one is called Eternal Vision Razgon. And like I mentioned before, the focus of a lot of the designs that I work on tend to be monster types. I've stated it before, but one of my goals as I get better with drawing in sprite form is to eventually work up to being able to draw people, humanoid type characters. I have a lot of ideas of things I'd like to do, but I haven't quite figured out a good way to draw humans in sprite form yet. But things like this that tend to be more horror monster-esque are some of my favorites to work on, and this particular creature is of the slime monster type. It's got a gelatinous body, a bunch of unsettling looking eyes, and a mouth full of fangs. For this one, I believe the very first point I started with was the eyes. Using just sphere tools or circle tools in Photoshop, I created several eye shapes and then drew the rest of the body around it. The shading and additional details were sort of meant to give it a liquidy, undulating sort of texture. And then, because it has this big mouth full of teeth, this is one of the few that has a top layer of additional detail, which is the puddle of drool around it. I think that effects like that work better if they're sort of overlaid on top of the original sprite. It makes it look like it's sort of popping out more, and the details are not lost. But overall, I did like this one. I think I have to remember, since I was just working on this a day or so ago, this might be one of the designs that I'm going to be putting into the Redbubble store soon. I'm going to be doing a big update, maybe if I have some time during the holidays, all at once. That's going to be a whole set of sprite designs that'll be up in the Redbubble store. Right now it's just a couple of them that I've posted just as an experiment, but I believe this is one of the ones I'm prioritizing. I'd have to go look. Okay, we are officially moving into June. This design was posted on June 12th of 2019, and this one is Igni, Flair, Drakra. And I believe this is the very first of the Eternus Core mecha designs I posted. This is way back at the very beginning when I first started drawing these mecha designs, and as you'll see, compared to some of the later samples I pulled from the mecha series, this one is not part of the modular core series that I've done videos on, where the mechas are created piece by piece and they're interchangeable. This was a static image of a piece created all at once, and it was early on in the whole project phase, which is why it's also not using the same schematic template that I've been using for all the mecha designs since. Because this one was posted a while ago, I didn't really see the point in going back and redoing the final post just using the template. But if I end up putting this one onto the shirt store, I will port it over to that template so that it's consistent with the rest of them. But overall, like I had mentioned before, and I'd have to go check the retrospective, I feel like there might have been a couple mecha designs from last retrospective. In fact, I could probably check that while we're here, since I have the folder with all the files handy. Because I tend to post a lot of different things over the course of a year, the order in which I post all these things is usually lost on me, so I can't remember what exactly I posted in each given year. But looking back at the archives, for last year at least, there wasn't anything from the Mecha series, so this would have been one of the first. It's possible there's something I didn't pull for the sample that came out earlier, but this was at the very beginning, so this predates the modular series by a little bit. Moving on, this one's from June 19th, 2019, and this one's called Gelatinous Orb Gulgru. And sort of like the Moodfish that I posted earlier, or talked about earlier on in the video, this particular design ended up being a bit more expressive than I originally anticipated. Like I've talked about on videos before, for a lot of my art in general, I don't go into the drawing process with any sort of idea. A lot of these things are just random thoughts and ideas that come out as I'm drawing, and then the end result is what you see. For this one, I started creating a slime-like creature, but it ended up being a bit more round in the end. And its mouth, just like the Moonfish, made it look like it had a visible expression compared to some of the other ones. And it kind of looks like it's happily smiling or making some sort of noise. And when I finished the shading and everything else and looked at it, I think someone pointed out on the stream too that it definitely emoted more than some of the other designs that I've made. And between the color texturing and the shading, I ended up liking this one a lot. It stood out to me compared to some of the other ones, which is why I picked it for the sample here. And if I haven't pulled it for the store template, then I'm probably going too soon, because I wouldn't mind doing a shirt design of this one and then maybe doing kind of like a whole group of them in different colors, sort of like a rainbow spectrum of slime creatures. I think that would be a fun design. I'll have to think about that. Next up, we are now in the month of July. This one was posted on July 17th, 2019. And this one is called Radiance Hound Corabas. And like I talked about before with the more beast-like sprite designs, I wouldn't consider myself an expert in drawing regular animals. So things like dogs or cats aren't necessarily my strong suit. But for this one, I looked at some references and drew this sort of canine creature that has these gold-plated claws and what looks like a gold-plated helmet on its head. It's actually not a helmet, it's just what its head looks like. But the end result is this sort of prowling-looking creature, which has a pretty distinct set of design elements. And also, I do like the color. This one has a stripe pattern, and the shading was a little bit tricky since I had to make sure and capture accurate shading when I was doing the patterns on the body. But overall, oh, and this one is aligned with the light element. I need to remember to talk about that. The last one was aligned with the water element. But for Corabas, interestingly enough, I did this one kind of like with the wind creature I posted earlier here in the video, Rowland. This one was part of a set of 4 different elemental types. I used the secondary elements for that set, I believe, so it would be light, shadow, lightning, and ice. But I used the base body template you see here, and then I redrew and redid other details for the alternate sprites. So you have 4 distinct creatures that have the same pose, essentially, but they all have very different features to reflect their sort of elemental differences. Those will probably go up at some point in the future as well. They're pretty distinct and they look different. Similar but different, which is a theme for a lot of these redrawn sprite alternates that I've done. Okay, we are moving on into August. This was posted on August 14th of 2019. And this one is called Formless Gouveia Zadro. I have to make sure I'm reading these names right. Move my monitor closer. And this one is part of a 2-stage series of forms. I didn't pull the first one because I wanted to pare it down a little bit. But these creatures are these serpentine, dragon-like slime creatures. And this one is a little bit unique compared to some of the others in that it's a multi-part sprite. The head, body, and tail of this serpentine ooze creature are all separate sprites. So what that means for the design purposes is you can actually move its different body parts around to make it look like it's sort of spreading out over a larger distance. In other words, if I put the head up here and the body somewhere over here and the tail over here, it would look like the thing is coming out of the floor across a larger distance, which is kind of the reason why I did this. The overall design is not terribly complex. It's got some specific texturing here and there, but the shading ended up being important for this one to show the slime-like textures on everything, make it look like it's sort of got a rippling effect, and this one is aligned with the shadow element. But overall, it's an interesting experiment. I do try and think up new ways to mess around with the whole sprite template and do things that are going to be a bit different from just the same formula. But I am happy with how this one turned out. It's a pretty unique looking design. Moving further on, we're in September now. This was posted on September 4th, 2019. And this is the first of the modular cores that I picked for the sample. It's not the first one posted because I know the Brigandine, which I've used in videos and talked about before, the Brigandine is the very first, but because that one's already been talked about, I think that's why I skipped ahead. And this one is the Core IO01 Claymore. And this particular post shows the schematic template I mentioned earlier, which all of the modular core mecha designs going forward will use this template, which looks like a sort of blueprint. It has the part labels on here, which I threw in here to sort of run with the idea that this is a schematic design for a mechanical creature. And then the emblems that I've created for each of the mecha units is up here in the corner. If you've tuned into my streams on Twitch, every once in a while I'll pull open the master file in Rhino, which is where I do those designs, and I'll start drawing another one for one of the models I've created. Basically, it's a simple two-dimensional design that's meant to reflect some of the traits and some of the color patterning of the final piece. It's not meant to be immensely detailed, but I try and do that so I'm not out of sync with the actual mecha posts. That way, when I put everything together into the template for final render, I have the emblem and the piece already done, and I can just customize the template, put together, and then put it up. But for this particular mecha model, the point of this design was a lot of blades, as evidenced by its name. The alternate customized variations, which I think there's been one of this one. This is one of the earlier ones. The customized variations will all have some sort of similar sword-based naming convention. For a lot of these, the naming conventions are based on some sort of theme. So when I do variations, it'll be some sort of additional twist on that theme. But we can go ahead and move on. I picked several from the modular core series to sort of talk about in contrast, since it's one of the newer things that I've done in the last year. Next up, this one was posted on September 11th, 2019, and this is another multi-stage, quote-unquote, evolution sprite design, and this is the Tendrix family. And the main themes for this particular series, these are avian-like creatures, bird creatures, and they are all aligned with the water element. And one of the through-line themes is the bird-like features, the beaks, but one of the main things that I included on these are these tentacle appendages that are on all of them. The first form down here in the lower left is sort of a more larva, hatchling-like form. It's got these tentacle legs and a pretty small body and these little feather-like armor plates on its body. Its second form gets more advanced limbs. It has a set of feet and a set of wings, so it's more like a wyvern in a way. Maintains the beak, and now the tendrils are more akin to its feathers. And for the final form, it's more griffin-like in design. With the beak, it's got 4 separate limbs and then 2 large wings with the sets of tendrils along the undersides of the wings. Looking at this, I haven't really thematically decided if this would be a flying creature or a swimming creature. To me, the water elemental theme plus the tendrils would be a bit more akin to something you find in the oceans as opposed to something you find flying. If we were to go by more quote-unquote natural rules. But when I was drawing these, the building on the idea of bird creatures was an interesting challenge. So when I was drawing the final form here, I wanted to create something that was definitely bird-like, but not something that was solely like a winged bird, which is how we got the more griffin-like form. Overall, this one was an interesting experiment too. I don't know if I put this one on the list for being put on the store. I haven't quite decided how the multi-stage ones would work, if I do all 3 in one image or what, but that's something I want to figure out, since putting these into one main product design would be an interesting challenge. Moving on, we're now in the month of October. This one was posted on October 23rd of 2019. We're getting close to the end of the list here. I think there's only a handful more between now and December. And this is another one of the modular core designs. This one is core 4GX01 landslide. And in contrast to the Claymore design posted earlier, this particular mecha design is a lot more bulky and heavy in design. The torso and the head unit specifically are a bit larger than some of the other ones, which is an interesting thing to work around when doing the customized variations. But the heavy body and long limbs with these sort of rake-like claws were a bit more unique and stood out compared to some of the other designs. I do like the mix of colors on this one. The sort of earth tone shade body and grays contrast pretty well with the claws. This thing would probably be used for heavy lifting or heavy movement, or maybe something like a siege unit. The individual components ended up being pretty interesting to work around when doing variations for the other cores. And overall, this one stood out from the others as far as its design, so that's why I included it in the collection here. Next up, we're at the end of October. This one was posted on October 30th of 2019, and this one is called Chillin vorpal Ulreth, and it is an ice element creature. And this one, unlike some of the other ones, is a more quote-unquote human-like creature, sort of a wraith or ghost-like creature that has this masked helmet on its head. And one of the main features for the design was this ice blade that it's wielding. You can't actually see its hands since they're obscured by its cloak or robe or whatever you want to call that. But taking a page from some of the RPG staples that you see in old RPG games. I wanted to create something that looked like a boss sprite or boss character that you'd fight in the games. And this one was part of a 2 variation set. I think I did ice and lightning. I might have done opposites. But for the other one, I redrew the armor and the helmet and the weapon. So the variation is a little bit more distinct compared to some of the other ones, but it uses the same base design. And I'll definitely be posting that at some point. Next up, we are in the month of November, actually the end of November. This one was posted on November 27th of 2019, and this one is called Purging Zeal Halmon. And this one is aligned with the light element, and like we've seen on some of the other ones in the sample, I'm realizing now that I tend to have a fondness for slime-type creatures, since there's been a couple of them that I've done so far. This one is a more orb-like slime creature that has this green metal helm-like protection thing on its head and 4 eyes. Overall, this was designed to be a bit more simple than some of the other ones. The next post is its actual second form. It's part of a 2-stage set of creatures, but I created something relatively simple for the first form and then decided to build on it more in the second, so we'll go ahead and move on. The next post should be 1 week later, December 4th, 2019, and this one is Colloid Clarity Vremerdon. And building on the themes from its first form, this is a slime-like creature that actually has limbs. It's got a gelatinous body, it's more snake-like, and the protective part of its head, this gold metal-looking crown thing, is a bit more pronounced than the previous form, and it also has this gold band-like protection thing on its tail. What I did for this one is just build on some of the ideas a little bit more from the previous form, since the previous form was just a circular blob. I wanted to make sure it had limbs, and overall it wasn't too hard to just add some additional features or build out some of the previous ones. And the shading on its body and color are very similar. It's a little bit lighter base shade, but a darker highlight, darker shadows. That's it for this one. Next up, this is the last one in the sample. Posted December 11th of 2019. And this one is Sapphire Tide Augier, and as you can tell from the title, its elemental affinity is water. And interestingly enough, this one, which is the only one of the elemental dragons I pulled for the sample this year, this one is one of the first larger scale sprites I did when I was first learning how to draw these in Photoshop. I believe this one was done in Photoshop. I'd have to go back and look at the original file. It's possible this was one of the last paint drawings, but given how complicated the shading is, I want to say this was a Photoshop one, but I honestly can't remember. But for this one, I went for a sort of Naga-like serpentine lower body dragon, and it has these crystal highlights all over its body for color contrast, sort of plate-like armor on its shoulders, and these lighter emerald-looking spikes. Overall, this one has a bit more detail than some of the other sprite designs, but despite it being a little bit more busy, I think it captures the elemental themes pretty well, and overall, this design is fairly iconic. I think one thing that does jump out at me looking at this one closely, some of the line work is a little bit less consistent. The shapes of a lot of the line work, the black parts, could have been cleaned up a little bit. I did go back and edit some of the outlines to clean them up a bit, but I didn't redraw anything. One thing I've gotten a little bit better at since I've been learning how to do these is keeping my line work a little more consistent. for the curvature of the neck and the body, it's a little bit more jagged. Since doing this, I've learned how to be a little bit more smooth when it comes to curves. Just looking at that tells me this might have been a paint one, because it was a lot more difficult to get consistent line work when doing this in paint. But I think it's good to post some of these older ones and take a look at some of the differences in the older drawing techniques and kind of learn and roll things forward. Which is the point of this whole exercise in retrospectives. A couple artists I follow do things like this every once in a while, where they'll go back through the work they posted and talk a bit about the pieces. And for anyone viewing this, the point of doing this isn't to just talk about how great I think my art is. I really don't want it to sound like some sort of arrogant ego-stroking thing, because whenever I post these, I put them up on the DeviantArt site and move on to the next thing. I usually don't get a chance to talk at length about anything related to the drawing or concept process. So this year-end wrap-up, which I started doing in 2018, is mostly a way to go back and look at the work that was done, and if I have anything interesting to say about pieces, or just ones that stuck out to me. That's the point of this series. And I understand that for art videos that might not necessarily be interesting to a lot of people, but it is something I want to make sure that I'm doing just as a reflection thing more than anything else. So for this particular session, looking at the clock, this ended up being under an hour. So what I will do is wrap up the recording session for the sprites, and when we come back again, I will repeat the same exercise for the two-dimensional designs that were posted in 2019. So I will see you guys then.